Welcome into the Bleav in Arizona Cardinals podcast. This is your host, Blake Murphy, and we're here to talk Arizona Cardinals in the month of June. Minicamp has just wrapped up with the final practice officially canceled. I'm joined, of course, here on the other side by someone from our sister podcast through Bleav, someone who's written more words about the Arizona Cardinals than pretty much anyone over the past 15 years or so. He is writer for Cards Wire, host of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the previous mentioned podcast there. It's Jess Root, and we are here to talk cards. Jess, it's the first time I think I've had you on the show in a while. After the first time for Bleav ever. It's good to be a part of the same network at last.
It's kind of cool. Yeah, they talked to me to come on over, and then suddenly you were they got you to do the show. We're kind of right at the same time, and so we're jumping on with the network kind of at the same time. My listeners have heard your voice a few times as if you stepped in for Seth a few times over the years. So
yeah, it's a crossover episode.
Crossover episode, and I wonder if they'll drop this show into my feed as well. So
that would not surprise me. Speaking of dropping into your feed, we got some big news that dropped in for Cardinals fans to talk about, but I do want us to be able to just kind of start generally, at least. I know a lot of people who maybe have not listened to your show, or some of our YouTube audience who maybe is not actually put on the headphones to listen to audio podcasts. Just it's a visual world out there right now. What is some of the actual feelings you have for this Cardinals team for the upcoming season? Because based off of Vegas odds, kind of our own feelings, everything else that's going there, it seems like it's in tune for a second in a row potentially miserable season for the Cardinals. And I say that as someone who, like you, can tend to be an optimist about these things.
Yeah, it's really hard to be optimistic about the coming season. Part of it, so what was frustrating about last year was the belief that they could be a contending team. They were hitting that next phase in their. They'd gone from, I described them in 2023 as a good bad team. They weren't a good team. They were a bad team. They were a bad team in 2023, but they were a good bad team because they were competitive. They were scrappy. It's exactly what you would want to see on a roster that lacked talent and didn't have, when you're starting Josh Dobbs for half the season. That's kind of what you expect. 2024, they actually, like, if you looked big picture, they were right on schedule. They were, start to finish, a pretty mid team. They were as mid as you could be because their losses came to teams, with the exception of the loss to the Carolina Panthers. They lost to double-digit win/playoff teams. Except the loss, that backbreaking loss to the Panthers that kind of set them back. But it looked that they were ahead of schedule if they were 6-4, and so that was a year that you were hopeful they were making the progress, and then you entered last season, and so you're like, all right, things go well. They could compete for the division. The division ended up being way better, and that it ended up they was kind of a dumpster fire after the first few games, because they stopped knowing how to win. I think that Tennessee loss broke them. It broke the team from that point, and then they were just terrible the rest of the year. And here's the thing for this year is that they don't look like, based on the offseason moves, there really isn't a position that you could say, okay, they got better at running back. But position to position, there's really nowhere else that they got better, markedly better at a position across the board. And so you go from being a bad team to a team that doesn't look improved at any position except running back. And so there's not a lot of hope that you have. And so and so my thoughts on coming into this season is, and then you add the clown show that the Cardinals tend to draw themselves every offseason, which is now the Jacoby Brissett holdout, which as a player, Jacoby Brissett is doing what he should, because if he's expected to start, he should be paid like a starter, and all NFL starters who are not on rookie deals are making $19 million and more. That said, he's not expected to start the whole season, and he's in a situation where there's no leverage for him, because they signed a guy that's basically Jacoby Brissett, 3 years younger in Gardner Minshew, and then they drafted a guy in Carson Beck. And so, not only are they a bad team, they're an uninteresting bad team because Jacoby Brissett as a starter, he's your least interesting, least intriguing quarterback situation in the entire NFL. Gardner Minshew starts, he's fun to watch. He's a ride. Good or bad.
He has athleticism and is able to escape, scramble, make some different plays.
He's got some fun to him.
He's got a little bit of fun to him. He doesn't
Ryan
have the same
Fitzpatrick.
consistency. Yes,
Right.
that's a good comparison.
Ryan Fitzpatrick he's a modern day Ryan Fitzpatrick who hasn't lasted as long or had as much success. And then you've got the promise of a Carson Beck. So either one of those, you've got at least something to look forward to. With Jacoby Brissett, I mean, numbers maybe, and
the consistency in the passing game is maybe the best you can argue for, but is it really with that
best football he's ever played? Can we expect that again?
Exactly.
He's 33 years old.
There's a lot of things at least that are really off. I think you can say that maybe you could argue, hey, they're going to have a better run game than last year. They were throwing the ball all over the place last year. Gardner reminds me a little bit of Josh McCown as far as like that typical journeyman quarterback who's got enough athleticism that he's going to like continue to get these one-year deals around the league. Like you said, it's a place where quarterback is so central to everything that I think NFL teams do. And the Cardinals this offseason, whether they went hard or were really not in the market for Malik Willis, they struck out there. We heard that they were looking at maneuvering to get Jimmy Garoppolo, struck out there. They kind of ended up defaulting back into what was a situation that everyone could probably say the Cardinals needed to move on from in Jacoby Brissett last year because he is who he is at this point as a starter. The only real addition that they made was Isaac Seumalo, who's a 33-year-old offensive guard on the offensive line. They added Tyler Algier to try to do a little bit more in the run game. Other than that, everything else has been really depth signings. They lost Calais Campbell, who ends up taking on a one-year deal with the Ravens for we're going to say that it's his last year, but he's probably going to still be playing by the time that like your kids have kids. Is probably what's going to happen with Calais. So it's just a place where the Cardinals are a team that markedly was a 3-win team last year, did not take significant steps to, I think, overcome that 3-win record from a year ago. And so maybe you're talking about 5 or 6 wins with what is going to frankly be a tougher NFL schedule than what they had a year ago. It does not bode well for this team, although there's other moves that I think they've made, particularly in moving to an offensive head coach that could have some promise. It's just going to be hard to see some of those moves potentially pay dividends in year one. And I think we're kind of on the same boat around that.
Well, and here's the thing. Now, granted, there is a Sean McVay magic that guys who worked under him seem to have, or a stigma that there's some optimism. But we have to remember that Mike LaFleur as a play caller was with the Jets, and they had an abjectly bad offense with a similarly bad quarterback situation. So there's hope. Like, he's got the LaFleur name, he's got the experience under McVay, but the only you look at what he's done actually as a play caller, and it's not impressive. I mean, and so, and while this feels better than the way the Jonathan Gannon era ended, they have a lot to overcome. And honestly, 2026 is not the year to look at when they got that, because they don't have a set quarterback situation. Their defense doesn't appear to be like the only thing they have going with their defense right now is health, and we'll see if that continues.
Yeah, it didn't get off to a great start this year, unfortunately. The Cardinals already are losing their first non-Power 5 conference player selected in last year's draft, but their only defensive player that was selected in last year's draft goes on to... They took 2 players,
Carson
yes.
Sherrar,
Carson Sherrar, but he was a Power 5 guy. Yeah, he's also hurt. So both of their rookies have been banged up at least. This is obviously talking about defensive tackle, and this is where like my brain is escaping me, at least for the most part.
Caleb Proctor.
Proctor. See, I was thinking of his name is almost identical to mine, just the letters mixed around. So that's something that would be easy for me to remember. But Proctor gets hurt. Carson Sherrar is hurt. You're really going to be running out Darius Robinson back there. Dante Stills will get a lot of snaps. Cody Simon is right now in the starting spot. There's a lot as far as this defensive side that has to be desired, as far as it's really going to be these guys taking a step forward from where they were at a year ago. I think a lot of what this Cardinals team feels like is it kind of feels like this is a team that's waiting for a 2027 year, whether it comes to with how they've spent, how they've attributed, just with how their quarterback situation is. This is the first year that they've had without Kyler Murray, and we saw how it went last year with a 1-11 record for Jacoby Brissett. This is really a team that's probably waiting until after week 11 or 12, maybe earlier would be the Carson Beck sort of situation. That's going to really tell, I think, the story for this franchise and this team. But before we get into that, we have another thing to talk about, which is Jacoby Brissett even going to be the week 1 starter? There is a quarterback competition, according to Cardinals head coach Mike LaFleur this week. He said he thinks the competition is going well. It's about all he spoke on it. We are in the middle of a holdout that only the Arizona Cardinals could get into with Jacoby Brissett, like you had mentioned previously, wanting more money. He knows that he's got actual ability for leverage. And if you say he doesn't have leverage, then the answer is, well, Cardinals could simply just cut bait, let Gardner Minshew go out there, let him be able to start. Some people would still be in favor of that. I don't know if the Cardinals would put Jacoby Brissett's picture up on the wall in their media room if that was going to be the case. This is just a unique situation where you're talking about paying a quarterback potentially anywhere from a bump up in contract to $19 million worth bump up in contract to potentially start for you for 6 or 7 games, get benched, and then you have either a rookie or Gardner Minshew take over. Where are we even at in the midst of this conversation? I think that this could come to a spot, but every time we hear about the conversation, according to Josh Weinfuss, according to others who covered the team, the Cardinals are significantly far apart from Jacoby Brissett in terms of negotiations. What are we even to make to all of this? And is there a happy resolution for Cardinals fans, Jacoby Brissett and the Cardinals? I don't think it has a happy ending per se, because that just has not been how Jacoby Brissett's time in the league has gone. But I do think that we could have at least a resolution to some degree.
Here's the thing, is that if Jacoby's taking the stance that he should be paid like a starter, he's looking for roughly $20 million a year. Probably Malik Willis money, $22.5 a year. He wants guarantees. So that's where, like, if that's what he's looking for, he's going to have to concede. Because I even proposed, I wrote sort of a proposal based on what should work that would get him his money, but also put him in a situation where he has to earn it. Because as we know, like, he right now is QB1, but no one thinks that with the way with the team is, and with the addition of Carson Beck, the hope that he might be something that he's not going to start 17 games. You know, if it were up to me, and again, Jacoby would have to agree to this, is you structure the contract to where he would make about $22 million if he started every game. So you could take his base salary from 4.9, just under 4.9, to about 11 million. And you could guarantee all of that if you wanted to. And that kind of going with the idea that, all right, we're gonna presume we're gonna right now they say you're gonna be the starter for at least half the season, and then base the remainder 11 million based on the number of starts / incentives. If you want to go kind of gross, you say $1 million per start after 8.
I was about to say $1 million per game or so after that would be,
and then another $2 million in incentives based on statistics and things like that. I don't know if he'd be willing to do that, because I think he goes into the season believing he's the starting quarterback. But the issue essentially was the Cardinals botched this from day one. All they had to do, and it was the perfect scenario to do it, brand new head coach. You know, they jettisoned who was their QB1 in Kyler Murray. They signed an equal caliber quarterback in Gardner Minshew, is to say, instead of telling Jacoby or leaking that, oh, Minshew's going to be the backup, you say this quarterback competition. Like, it's the perfect scenario, and whoever wins the competition wins the competition. And then maybe there comes some contract issues later, but, you know, Jacoby, while he's in year 11, he's played a ton of football. He's probably played in similar schemes and scenarios but he hasn't, like, Mike LaFleur has zero on-field, like, eyeball to eyeball, in-person evaluating reps in his system with Jacoby Brissett.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what the feeling is. I like, is this a situation where the front office is saying Jacoby's our guy, or or what does LaFleur feel about this? Like, I don't know if there's a happy ending, and I know one thing we're going to talk about in a little bit adds to the puzzle, because if they go a different route this summer, I don't see there's no scenario in which Jacoby comes back.
Right. I think at least I would have looked at when you signed Gardner Minshew, just take a lot of what Jacoby, he had $1.5 million in guaranteed salary, some other bonuses, guarantee his base salary completely would have been the first step I'd have made to bring that guaranteed number up to about $5 million. You got him at $5 million, Gardner at $6 million. If he's going to demand more and say, I need $19 million to be the starter, who's got egg on their face in that situation? It's not the Cardinals. It would have been Jacoby Brissett, because he would have already gotten paid, if gotten that money guaranteed. Instead, now you've got this in a dramatic sort of holdout situation where you're probably talking about the Cardinals potentially having to eat an additional $10 million on top of that if they want to have Jacoby as their starter. And if they don't want to have Jacoby as their starter, it'd be pretty easy to just simply, Jacoby Brissett has been released, or the Cardinals are looking to trade him, and after they trade him, cut him. There's going to be, unfortunately, a little bit of dead money that you'd have to eat, but you'd be probably saving, when you're talking about that dead money, $10 million you'd pay out to Jacoby. Even if you were going to be taking on some dead money, it would be kind of ends would justify the means in that regard. So yes, you're right. The Cardinals did botch it from the beginning. It seems like in a lot of different ways, that's just been kind of the offseason. It's continued with under Monty Ossenfort, where a lot of the things we had hoped after seeing just coming out of the kick the can down the road, a Steve Keim approach to a Monty Ossenfort, next year will be the year, next year will be the year approach, has kind of replaced some of that. Now, that being said, there is one way the Cardinals could, instead of waiting for the 2027 quarterback class, there is a way that they could potentially fast track that. And that is because the big news this week, Texas Tech quarterback Brandon Sorsby is declaring for the NFL supplemental draft. He has decided to not go through the legal situation of trying to fight with Texas Tech against the rest of the Big 12. I Bleav it was actually the AG, Ken Paxton, said, I will sue on behalf of Sorsby and Texas Tech in order to make this happen. I think that the legal team then probably looked at that and laughed, because it's like the Big 12 would then have been in a legal battle whether the Big 12 could punish a member of the Big 12. That was probably going to work, and I think Sorsby, with an incoming deadline of June 22nd, realized if he was going to have any chance to make an NFL roster, he couldn't potentially risk getting suspended for the whole season, sitting out, having teams refuse to play Texas Tech. I think he made the smart move in then declaring for the NFL supplemental draft. It's going to be interesting, because him as a prospect is someone who a lot of people have compared him this way, and I'll kind of do a couple of comparisons for those not familiar with NFL scouting and how that works. A lot of the professional scouting that's done on NFL.com is done by Lance Zierlein, son of a former Cardinals coach, Larry Zierlein, actually. Zierlein is a guy who's given a grade of 6.24 for Brendan Sorsby. He views him as an average starter. For some context, he graded Ty Simpson as 6.3 and Cardinals quarterback Carson Beck as 6.14. So he kind of falls in the middle of those two guys. I've seen one or two games of Sorsby. I haven't really delved into him too much, although he was a guy that I wanted to get into. He was that prototypical big arm quarterback that you want to be able to see him play another year at a different program to see if he can take that leap, because he's got first round tools. Maybe not a Mahomes Allen arm, but he's got a big arm. Maneuverability, has a lot of that size. He's got first round tools, but when you watch his tape this past year, he had round 3 to round 4 tape, because there was issues against Nebraska. There was times that he was able to keep plays alive with his legs, but struggled when being able to move the ball through the air. You really were like, wow, he would have been great to come back to college football and have another year on tape so we could actually see what kind of prospect he'd be. Instead, he's going to the NFL, and you're going to have to basically just bet on, pun not intended, that player who is then in the midst of a gambling addiction to the point where he was ultimately betting on his own team. He was betting on balls and strikes that were there in baseball games. That's how deep the gambling addiction got to. You're also talking about, will the NFL accept him when he's coming into the league? Will there be a suspension incoming? Will they even let him go into the supplemental draft? All sorts of off-field questions aside, all sorts of on-field questions aside, this is an opportunity for the Arizona Cardinals to potentially add to the quarterback room. The question is, should they add to the quarterback room and potentially put in a bid for Sorsby in the supplemental draft?
So for me, and Seth and I just recorded our show earlier today on the topic. And so it depends on, for me, it depends on the value. So a couple of things I worry about. You look at him as a prospect, and I go, well, if you look at school, is he a better prospect than Desmond Ridder? Okay, who went to Cincinnati, and granted, and we saw who Desmond Ridder was. He was exciting. Sorsby's probably got a better arm, but has similar mobility. And you want to go a little deeper. Is he a better prospect than Clayton Tune, who was a fifth round? Cardinals fans know him. Similar size, similar skill sets. When Tune was granted, Tune played for Houston when they were not in the Big 12. And so the competition wasn't as same. But Tune, who was a more refined passer, similar athleticism, but against lower competition. And for me, there's potential. There's no way I'm going round 1, round 2. I would maybe. And when it came to the NFL draft, my take was Carson Beck I wanted to see in round 4 or later, day 3. I get why they did round 3. But I would have much preferred a quarterback on a day 3 pick. And so if the Cardinals were to gamble, bid a day 3 pick, round 4, 5, 6, 7, and land him, well, that's kind of intriguing because I think the automatic thing that happens is that means you are saying goodbye to Jacoby Brissett. And now, at least, the Cardinals now have a very interesting quarterback. They have an interesting bad quarterback room because Gardner Minshew, intriguing fun to watch. Then you've got the hope and developmental upside of both Beck and Sorsby, and which then allows you to take a look at all 3 of those quarterbacks, potentially the young players over the course, and even though it's kind of nonsense, if the season is as bad as we think it's being, and we don't see much from Beck, and we don't see much from Sorsby, if they're a top 3 team, why not go ahead and get your top quarterback? Because you didn't invest much. Now, is that a mismanagement of draft assets, giving round 3 pick, a day 3 pick in this? So using a 2026 round 3. A 2027 first round and day 3 pick on quarterbacks, just trying to throw crap at the wall. But in terms of as a fan, as watching this team, I'm like, well, why not? This team's going to be bad either way. So at least there is an intriguing / hopeful bad, as opposed to you have Jacoby Brissett as your quarterback. He's neither the present, like you don't feel he's really the present, and you definitely know he's not the future, and he's not going to help you win any more games. I think, like, hey, that sounds like fun. Now, the question is would they be outbid by another team? Probably, but if they got him if they bid a round 5, I wouldn't feel bad if they got him with a round 5 supplemental pick, because you could give up a day 3 pick next year, and maybe if you trade one of the other guys that you've got an excess in running backs, you can acquire that day 3 pick back. And so I, for one, I question how sure I don't think he's even as sure of a prospect as Carson Beck, and I think Carson Beck is a really high floor type prospect. I Bleav that at minimum he will have a Matt Barkley like career. Now, you say, well, Matt Barkley didn't have much of he was in the NFL for about a decade. Yeah.
It's one of those places where Sorsby is almost like the anti-Beck. And that was one place where someone's like, well, why would you go against Carson Beck? Look at how many starts he's won. Look how many games he's played. Look at all the national championships he's done. Whereas Sorsby is a tools guy, where he's got an arm that Carson Beck does not have. And so that gives you more upside to that degree. The highest level upside that someone I think is given would be if you take a look at and say, all right, let's say that Sorsby went out, had a decent season. Could he go in the Jackson Dart range of late first next year? Dart was probably more polished than where Sorsby is now, but you're betting on this a year in the future. The hard part is you could also look at it the other way, where some of the comparisons you could say is, hey, like when you look at Brandon Sorsby, he's kind of got a lot of the tools in areas where you'd look at him and say, Logan Thomas may have actually had more tools than Brandon Sorsby had. And we all know how Logan Thomas ended up. He is not one of those players.
Tight end career.
Solid tight end career. Did not pan out at quarterback outside of one 80-yard pass to Andre Ellington. That was the only completion he had on the day against the Broncos. So you're looking at a wide range of outcomes. I think I agree in terms of if you're talking about the Cardinals being able to be an intriguing team, you're probably going to be saying that if they spent the pick on Beck and are looking at the higher ceiling, and you have Beck and Sorsby going at it with Gardner Minshew as like your starter, that gives you a picture of what the Cardinals are going to be this year that I think is clearer than maybe the current picture as far as getting better. What the Cardinals' current picture is right now is you got a picture of Jacoby starts, Carson Beck takes over. Things probably aren't going to go that well for either because they're both likely backups at this level of football. Maybe you strike lightning in a bottle with Carson Beck, and it probably would be in a way to win the Cardinals a couple games away from the number 1 overall pick is how that could work because that's how the Cardinals operate. But when it comes to intrigue and an interesting storyline, having Gardner Minshew start the season, you say goodbye to Jacoby Brissett because, well, I would agree with Kyle Odegaard's take, and he said just put all 4 quarterbacks in there, let whoever's the best man deal it out. I think there's a limit to what you can have as far as quarterbacks in a quarterback room, and I think that 4 is going to be too much. Somebody just would not have enough reps to be able to go around. So unless Sorsby like gets suspended,
we know is dead man walking. Caden Slovis is dead man walking.
Poor guy. At least is going to be potentially a practice squad guy at least at best, and that's what you're hoping for.
Not even here because the Cardinals are going to have 3 quarterbacks on their 53-man roster.
Exactly. They may not even have a quarterback that's there on the practice squad. Just saying, let's give Carson Beck more reps. So you're talking about unless Sorsby and they know the NFL is going to like suspend him for the whole year, so you can not have to worry about a roster spot unless it's one of those situations. You're probably going to have to say goodbye to one of those quarterbacks. I've been of the case of looking at the specific pick ranges. You're going to have to give up your own pick for next year. And it's also a bidding process based off of where your draft pick was the previous year. So when the Cardinals previously have been down this road before, they bid in the 2019 supplemental draft on Jalen Thompson. They bid a 5th-round pick. We don't know if any other teams placed bids. From what it sounded like, no other teams actually placed a bid on him that year is what it sounds like. But the Cardinals had the 1st overall pick that year because they had the 1st pick after selecting Kyler Murray in the number 1 overall. So the 1st pick in every single round. They took Jalen Thompson and beat out every other team that could have put forth a 5th-round pick. If you do want to bid on getting the likes of a Brendan Sorsby, you're talking about having a high 4th-round pick. You would basically be in competition against the Raiders, who are very unlikely to take Sorsby. The Jets are intriguing because they took a 6th on Cade Klubnik, and it would be a lot better of a prospect, I think, to take a Brendan Sorsby if you're looking for a potential future at the position, don't want to wait another year, or could just say this is a higher level backup than we could have gotten previously. And then the Cardinals, I believe, are right up there with, I believe, I think there's one more team that was picking up there. It might be the Tennessee Titans, who are seemingly unlikely to take a quarterback. So if you're the Arizona Cardinals and you can spend that round 4 draft pick, you may be able to beat out teams like the Buccaneers, the Steelers, a team at least. Who knows? Maybe the Chiefs just throw something at the wall because they're just looking for someone behind Patrick Mahomes and can potentially put him through the Andy Reid quarterback tree. I don't know at this point. But I can say that if the Cardinals wanted to spend a 4th-round pick, there is a good chance that they could be able to get him even ahead of a team like the Cleveland Browns, which makes this kind of an intriguing process. Here's where things get a little complicated, though. If you're a team like the Buccaneers and the Steelers, you may have 3rd-round picks that you're willing to actually throw in, and I could see the Cardinals easily putting in their 4th. It's an early 4th, day 3 pick. And another team like the Steelers don't really have a future after Aaron Rodgers, could bring Brendan Sorsby back in. They could just say, we're going to give and bid a day 3 pick, knowing that's probably going to be a late day 3 pick unless things go awry. Because of Pittsburgh's roster having that strength, it's probably going to be a mid to late day 3 pick that would beat out your pick. Whereas the Cardinals, they could be giving up potentially a top 90 pick that if the Cardinals roster is bad at the top of round 3, similar to what we saw with Carson Beck being the 65th overall pick this year. That's something that I think if you're the Cardinals, do you really want to go down that avenue knowing you may be spending another draft pick on a quarterback in this next year's draft who may blow all of these quarterbacks on your roster out of the water in a year? I think that's probably where I would draw the line right there, would be on the round 4 selection. I'd put the pick in. Round 3, too expensive.
Correct. That I feel exactly the same way. Because there's too many question marks about, like, he could be like, and I was talking about the show is like the 2027 draft class is believed to be quarterback heavy, but we know that some guys are going to fall out with their play and some guys are going to go up. Like maybe Sorsby with that loaded Texas Tech roster could have had a Fernando Mendoza type season, but you also saw how he played down the stretch when Cincinnati lost their final 4 games. Now he went. There was a 7-game win streak, and we needed 20 touchdown passes and no turnovers. And then, and Cincinnati looked really good in the Big 12. And then things kind of fell apart, losing to Utah, losing to BYU,
Nebraska.
losing to Nebraska was but they lost their 4 straight at the end. They were against good competition, but Cincinnati went from contender to basically nothing really, really quickly. I have to pull up I was just looking at it.
Which is, someone has even pointed
Arizona,
out,
BYU, TCU.
It was also like that, and this is what someone pointed out, which of course caused for concern. Like, it's almost like them going that quickly. It's like if someone had decided to bet against their team every single week for how that would have turned out, they would have made a killing on it. And that gives you caution or concern. So we're not like accusing or putting stuff out in the ether, but it is one of those parts of when you're talking about this sort of gambling addiction for all these other things that are there, it's going to naturally be a factor because you confirm bet on your own team and bet against them in the past. People are going to say, unless you've shown that something has changed, I'm going to assume that the same thing could potentially take place in the future. This whole entire situation is something where I like to give benefit of the doubts that like be more of the appreciate players could be more the Tyrann Mathieu approach that they can get their life together after a big off-field incident like this is usually where I like to be that optimistic side. But it is something that's a caution. I know there's all these people, at least who made jokes about there being a BetMGM casino right outside of Cardinal Stadium, at least if they wanted Sorsby. That's been one of the things that trended on social media. It is one of those spots where it is a little bit of a concern enough where I think that you do as a fan want to be able to see your team take steps forward to improve their roster. This is a way to improve their roster, but you're also assuming risks that do come along with it. And that's one of the places where I think that we can pretty safely say, based off of what his projection is going to be, that there is an upward limit to what the Cardinals can spend on him and what they can spend on quarterbacks this year. And I think that limit we've discussed is probably going to be I think the only question that would remain is, do you then potentially put him in competition to start over a Carson Beck for this season? It's a new environment. He'd be learning the playbook, all the other things that would come back in. I think at the end of the day, all of the Sorsby talk, in my opinion, is one of those places where until it actually happens as a Cardinals fan, it's great to think or discuss about, but the reality of it isn't really going to hit. And this is kind of like the Ty, and I want to wrap it up by compared to the Ty Simpson talk. We spent months talking about Ty Simpson. He went to the Rams instead, wasn't even an issue. This is kind of the same sort of a spot. Until he's actually a Cardinal, we can think about what it may be as far as drafting him, but we'll have to actually see that come to fruition before we can then really talk about him. I just like it as the idea of if you're going to be trying to bring in an anti-Carson Beck who has upside, I think that's the perfect level of player you could bring in to compete with Carson Beck. I just disagree that you should then look at him as a competitor to Gardner Minshew or Jacoby Brissett when it comes to those guys in the long run.
Oh, no. I think this would be – I think this is the season. This is a year where all 3 of the quarterbacks, whoever they are on the roster, are going to start. That's just how bad seasons tend to go.
Yeah. Jacoby's health is something we haven't talked about. He took a lot of sacks last year. He managed to make it through the whole season. You can't bank on health, but it is going to be interesting with the offseason program happening and him not being part of it.
If starter, if they're 0-7, you can't keep throwing him out there.
Yeah.
You have to make a change. And so that's when you enter Gardner Minshew for a few games. And then, like, honestly, the Carson Beck situation, like, if they can weather till the bye week with their 2 vets, that bye week in week 14, where then they come off of that and they play, the Jets, they have got 2 winnable games right in a row. When you've got the perfect situation, Beck's been sitting all year, he's been learning, here's a bye week to prepare, and then you're playing a lesser team, perceived, to kind of set that up. But no, if it starts with Gardner, I think, especially since Beck's had the offseason reps. Sorsby is kind of he's not going to have any offseason reps. Maybe in training camp, and then after that, dealing with the suspension. Like once he's back from it, he's like kind of like how they went from David Blau to Trace McSorley at the end of 2022. It's just like, hey, who do we have? You've given Beck a few games, and this feels very much like 1990s Arizona Cardinals with the quarterback situation, where you're like, hey, we've got a veteran, but now we're bad, so let's try something else. Oh, let's try something else just why not? Because that's kind of how this year feels. And
it's been very Cardinals.
If we get evaluate a little bit, at least it'll be interestingly forward. Or even if Sorsby never plays, Carson Beck wraps up the year, but he isn't particularly good. You still have the option to get a guy, and Jacoby's not. Jacoby would be gone, Gardner would be gone, and then you just kind of roll and see what happens with the young guys. I don't know, because if they're going to be bad anyway, you better be at least bad with upside and hope.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the whole takeaway here, at least, is just getting something different for the Arizona Cardinals from where they were at a year ago with how we saw it end with Jacoby Brissett. Something different, at least, that we can kind of wrap up the show about is the potential to keep some Arizona Cardinals players. That would be with Paris Johnson having his contract being up. He's talked about in camp, said that he's just trying to focus on one moment at a time, is trying to not really focus on the contract, believes it'll play it all out. Michael Wilson being the other who's due for a contract. I'm kind of in a unique spot because I've looked at the two of them and I said that I could see a justification for paying both players. I could see a justification for not paying the two of them. I think, at least when it comes down to it, if I had to pick between the two of them, I would pick to pay Paris Johnson because it's harder to find that 6'6" athletic tackle who can shut down opposing pass rushers than it is a former third round, 6'2" contested catch king, as we saw last year, who's got great routes, can get separation at the line, has good hands down the end at the stretch, could kind of show that he could be that wide receiver one on a bad team down the stretch. He's the one that's a bit more interesting because we've seen availability has been kind of a question for both guys to some degree, although it's been more for Michael Wilson than it has been Paris. Michael actually had his first truly healthy season this last year, finishing and getting to that 1,000 yards. When it comes to contract, we can talk about numbers in the next section, but do you think that these are Cardinals who are worthy of being paid? And then the even better question is, should then the Cardinals actually pay them? Because I think that's what it really is going to come down to in what is probably going to be a bad season for Cardinals fans.
Well, the Wilson one is interesting because you look at the Christian Watson deal. It depends on the price point. Depends on the price point. So if Michael Wilson were a free agent now or this offseason, how much would he have gotten paid? He would have gotten paid a lot. Now, if he does it again, like if he produces like he did last year, that price tag is going to go up. But if I were the Cardinals, especially with who you have and the fact that he was a garbage time merchant, mainly because the Cardinals played a lot of garbage time. I mean, it's not his fault they were losing by 3 scores. And so you catch balls that are thrown your way. Can he thrive with Marvin Harrison healthy? Because it was always one or the other. Mm-hmm. And so there's kind of a price point. And if that price point is met, because why would he go less than $20 million a year based on his production, based on like Christian Watson? And why would the Cardinals want to pay him that much? Meanwhile, Paris, at least you have another year. You have a year to play with that. Yeah. And understandably with him, like if he plays well, if they get him, like he's already thinking, he mentioned it last year, $40 million is he wants to be a $40 million tackle. Now, he wants to elevate his play to that level. But he also knows, because he's under contract for another year, and if he's healthy and he plays at a Pro Bowl level this year, his price tag's just going up. Yeah. So he has patience because he has some security to begin with. To me, it depends on price point. Like, where's the Cardinals' price point? Because there is no urgency to extend Paris now, and they shouldn't have urgency to extend Wilson if it's Christian Watson money, because. And here's the thing, Watson, who's never had more than a 600-yard season, who's never had more than 41 catches in a year. Wilson had 78 and over 1,000, and his other 2 seasons were over 500. So he's accomplished basically as much in 3 seasons as Watson's done in 4 seasons. And Watson got 20, his real value, I think, was $23.5 million, like the 5 year.
23.5.
Yeah, and so you look at that, and like, why would Wilson, as an NFL wide receiver, take less than that? Because he's also part of the players union. There's going to be, you get the money you can get and you don't go below market, because what are you doing? And so it's going to come down to extend Wilson if he's at certain point in salary demands. If it's more than that, well, let it play out, because you could franchise him next year if you wanted to.
It would be for about $30 million or so a year, which it's funny.
If he's a 1,000-yard receiver again, he's going to be a $30
million guy. Yep. It's something that was very fun. I was looking at Spot Track has been down, at least. I think I just have to reset my cash, but they had a good valuation for him of about, I think it was $18 million a year is what I believe your co-host Seth Cox talked about. Over the Cap has a valuation of about $21 million a year. It was hilarious to see, like, they would actually go in a game-by-game evaluation based on player performance, how much they would be, and to see him spike up after that Week 10 game of 180-plus receiving yards that he had against the San Francisco 49ers. He spiked up to like a $35 million a year guy, and then from making probably about $10 million a year. So you're talking about like a very small sample size of the last 8 games of the season to then pay a guy the amounts that you're talking about of north of $23 million a year. I understand that being a difficult bet. I think if you can get him for a little bit under that, where you can say, hey, you haven't been as available with some of the health areas, get him for $21 million. Maybe you throw a couple more incentives later where he can make actually more than Christian Watson made if he's able to produce. I think that's the win there. The thing with me with Paris, at least, is that if you're going to be paying him off of his worst season and getting him at a discount, you don't technically have to pay him. But I do think that it's one of those places where if Paris would agree to it, then I think you could be able to potentially save if you're the Cardinals, because like we said, if they go out and do it again, you're going to be talking about a huge increase in what you're going to have to pay some of those guys, to the point where you may not be able to keep Michael Wilson given the investments in Marvin Harrison Jr., Jeremiah Love. You may end up seeing him walk for a potentially as high as a 4th round or 3rd round comp pick that you could potentially then draft a replacement receiver in. It's a lot harder then, though, to just say, well, we're going to then, I think there's a great Family Guy clip on it where it's like, hey, we can give you a boat or a ticket out of the mystery box. And that's really what draft picks are, because you could say, hey, it could be a boat in the mystery box where you already have a boat. His name is Michael Wilson. I think that being able to keep players who are hits on your draft pick is part of a culture move for the Cardinals that they need. I think it's helpful to be able to also have things that are known commodities. Like, you now know that Michael Wilson can be a 1,000-yard receiver because he's just done it. That's where I think there is a benefit to paying both of these different players. I think it's really difficult because you're at the Cardinals talking about in a down season, you've got a chance to be able to then put these players to the test and be able to say, are you really going to actually go out there and prove that you're going to be a $30 million a year receiver, be a $40 million a year left tackle? I've been more of the boat camp of paying some of those guys now because you'll regret it in the future. But I also am more toward that with Paris Johnson, who I've seen the reliability, the pedigree that got him to being that top 10 pick. And we've seen a lot more flashes on the field versus seeing the last 8 or 9 games in garbage time of Michael Wilson. So I've kind of said that I would lean toward get Paris some of the money, lock him up for the future. You've recognized at minimum, he's probably going to be able to be a DJ Humphries caliber player at left tackle over the next couple of years of what that contract could be. If that's the minimum that you're getting, then that's probably going to be good enough where maybe every once in a while there's a season where you could say he's overpaid. But for the most part, you're probably going to get your money's worth out of that contract. Whereas Michael Wilson at $21 million a year with some of the health concerns and questions, how does he fit in with that? That's a much more intriguing area for the Cardinals, where I'm curious at least on how that one would pan out if he ends up falling short or even doing again what he did this past season. You've got a lot of different outcomes that I think that I could see with Michael Wilson. And maybe that's just because he's a skill position player versus Paris being an offensive lineman.
Yeah, either one of those cases. And here's the other point as well. Like, you're also trying to build winning. Do you want to pay decent players for bad teams? Or are they going to be decent players for a good team? Like, is Michael Wilson more than a productive player for bad teams? Paris, due to his position, you need a left tackle either way. But like, do you want to go out and make Michael Wilson a $25-30 million a year player on bad teams? Like, is that like why you want to do that unless he continues to produce, mad numbers like that, and at least he's making fantasy people happy and he's putting up Like the play looks better than the results on the field.
Right. And that's something that also goes back to that whole Jacoby Brissett situation of paying the guy who went 1-11 to be able to be that 1-11 guy. I think you can look at it where it comes to star qualities, at least. Trey McBride is a great example because no one regrets that Trey McBride contract that the Cardinals paid out, but he's been Mr. Reliable week in and week out. It's been unique to know if Michael Wilson is going to be that guy or not. I think it leans to that we can pretty much say that we know what Paris Johnson is going to be, at least from what we've seen so far. I just would like to see a little bit more.
Right.
That's how I think we'll wrap up that section. Let's close with a quick question now, because the Cardinals at this point have gone from, like you had mentioned earlier in the show, running back is the one position that they actually improved on this offseason. They now have a plethora of running backs. Bam Knight has returned. They got James Conner back on a one-year deal. Trey Benson, of course, being now the kind of potential odd man out who either would have to play special teams to make the roster. He's never done that
Zero
before.
special team snaps in his
He's
career.
never taken any of those. And you're then talking about, obviously, you paid Tyler Algier. There's no ability that you can to get off of that contract, regardless of what you do this year. You can't trade him. You can't cut him because of the dead money you're going to take on from Tyler Algier. And that's how it goes with most free agent signings. Like, you sign a free agent and get buyer's remorse 90% of the time, maybe unless you're the Ravens and fail someone on a physical, you can't get out of that deal. So you're at least stuck with him for 1 year. You just drafted Jeremiah Love. The question, of course, is going to be, which one would you trade of James Conner or Trey Benson if it comes down to it and if teams come a-calling? And that's something that I think a lot of Cardinals fans may not be happy with what the return would be for either player, but for sure I can tell there'd be one player in particular that would be really miserable if that player got traded. And that would be the fan favorite in James Conner, who I think is probably the more likely of those two to actually have a market.
Oh, absolutely. He's got proven potential. He's a veteran. You see the years of production. He has value because between him and Benson is all potential. He's had 2 season-ending injuries. He's shown flashes, but there's not consistent production. It's going to be tough to find a market for Trey Benson unless he absolutely lights it up in the preseason. I don't know, how much can you show in the preseason when he's going to be his reps are going to come against the scrubs, so he should look good. Quote unquote scrubs. They're not really scrubs, but the guys, they're UFL players that they're that's who Trey Benson's going to be going up against. And Seth and I talk about this all the time on our show. When you're an established or a potential, you should look like the best player on the field when you're playing against those guys. And that's generally how that goes. James Conner has trade value because now he's got the age. Now, neither one of them is going to net more than the day 3 pick. Yeah. Neither one of them.
Not even a high day 3 pick, I would argue. I'd say it'd probably be if someone got a 5th, I would be flabbergasted. I think it'd be probably a 6th or a 7th, especially considering that Cardinals don't have a lot of leverage in the situation. You don't have to pay that much to pry one of those players from them. And it is probably one of those cases, at least, where a lot of fans would be disappointed if James Conner was essentially dealt from the team for a 6th-round pick. But I think that would be probably fair value for where he's at this point, for what you can get. Back in the day, the Cardinals,
years old, season-ending injury,
lost a step after last year's, coming off of the Achilles that we saw. It is one of those places where Trey Benson's value is from the guy you saw in college that has had similar injuries that have kept him off of the field. And probably had a couple of things he didn't get on the field a lot as a rookie. He had issues with pass protection, just didn't seem like his vision was there. It'd be interesting to see. He would be kind of the lottery ticket, I think, that'd be maybe less proven, but you could get more out of him because if he does perform and play well for you, like a franchise caliber back, that's what could potentially be there for you. Whereas that James Conner's got his best days behind him, whereas he's probably best suited as a 3rd down back for the Cardinals at this point. While they're ramping up Jeremiah Love. And even then, you're probably taking snaps away from the number 3 overall pick that you should be getting those snaps too if you drafted him that high. I think it's one of those places where at the end of the day, the Cardinals are probably going to lose one of those players. I don't think that they will cut either one, but I could see a round 6 or 7 draft pick traded from some team that sees a running back go down in the preseason. Or maybe if there's further legal concerns with the Packers. I know there's been a lot of Packers fans, even with that Jonathan Gannon connection, that have been made through that. that will just about wrap it up for our show today. Jess, thank you again so much for tuning in. It's fun to finally get out of like the group text, actually into chatting with you. For those who don't know, there's like a podcasters group text that me, Seth, Jess, Johnny, and others are all like participate in. That's where we spend most of our time talking. We don't actually get some of this FaceTime like we get. So it's good to actually see you like in the flesh for once, Jess.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, you can then follow Jess and his podcast. His work is at Senior Jess Root on Twitter. That's Senior as in Spanish because of the Spanish teaching that Jess does, of course, while he's not writing about the Arizona Cardinals or is podcasting on it for the Rise Up See Red podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening in. Don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and write a review. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. This has been the Bleav in Arizona Cardinals podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Blake Murphy. We'll see you guys next time.